Hi guys and welcome to Quiet History Vault. Tonight we step carefully into a morning that feels both famous and strangely unfamiliar. You stand in the pale grey light just before sunrise, the kind of light that makes everything look softer until you notice what is actually there. A rooster cries somewhere nearby, not as a charming background sound but as a sharp reminder that the day has already begun whether you are ready or not. Smoke drifts low across the ground from a cluster of chimneys. It stings your eyes and settles into your throat with a taste that feels older than memory. You probably imagine 1776 as a neat parade of powdered wigs and brave speeches. Instead, you find mud clinging to your shoes, a thin chill pressing through your clothes, and the uneasy sense that you might not last very long here. You probably will not survive this in the way you expect. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, tell me where you are listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now dim the lights. You begin to move along a narrow path that is less a road and more a suggestion worn into the earth by hooves and boots. The ground feels uneven beneath your feet. Each step produces a soft sucking sound where yesterday's rain has not yet decided to leave. A wagon creaks past you, its wooden wheels groaning like tired bones. The driver nods without stopping. Conversation at this hour is a luxury, work waits for everyone. In the distance, the outlines of modest buildings emerge from the mist. They look smaller than you imagined. Rough boards, crooked fences, a scatter of livestock that wander with the authority of creatures who have never heard of property lines. A thin dog watches you with cautious curiosity. Somewhere nearby a child begins to cry, then quickly stops as if reminded that noise wastes energy. A familiar historical truth settles quietly into your thoughts. In 1776, most people in British North America live in rural settings rather than bustling towns. Grand political debates exist, of course, but daily life is still rooted in fields, rivers, and forests. Independence will be declared this year, yet for now survival remains the louder voice. You sense this not as a dramatic revelation, but as a steady pressure. The land demands attention in a way that speeches cannot. You pass a patch of cultivated earth where rows of young plants push stubbornly through the soil. A woman bends over them, her hands already dark with dirt. She straightens briefly and studies you. Her expression holds no romantic glow of revolutionary spirit. It holds calculation. Are you useful? Are you trouble? Are you one more mouth to feed? After a moment she returns to her work, the rhythm of motion. Motion more important than curiosity. There is a smell in the air that you struggle to name. It is part wood smoke, part damp straw, part animal warmth. It wraps around you like a rough blanket. Your modern senses search for something cleaner, something more controlled. Instead, you find a world where nature and necessity share the same narrow space. A quirky tidbit drifts into your awareness as you watch a man lead 2 oxen toward a field. Some colonial farmers are said to have believed that talking gently to their animals improved the harvest, a blend of practical care and quiet superstition. The man murmurs to his team as he walks. His voice is low, almost soothing. You wonder whether he believes the animals understand him or whether he simply needs to believe that someone does. The sky brightens slowly. Colour seeps back into the landscape, revealing details that twilight had softened. Laundry hangs stiff on a line like frozen flags. A stack of firewood leans precariously against a wall. Chickens scatter as a boy runs past you carrying a wooden bucket. His bare feet slap against the earth. He moves with purpose that feels older than his years. You notice how sound travels differently here. Without engines or distant traffic, each noise stands alone. The scrape of a shovel, the crack of a splitting log. The soft murmur of voices exchanging news that may already be out of date by the time the sun fully rises. Information moves at the speed of footsteps. Rumour moves faster. Historians still argue whether the average colonist in 1776 truly grasps the scale of what is unfolding politically. You sense the truth might be complicated. Some people speak passionately about liberty, Others speak only about crops, debts, and the price of salt. The idea of a new nation hovers like a distant storm cloud. Everyone can see it. Not everyone feels ready for the rain. You approach at a small cluster of buildings that might generously be called a village. A sign swings above a doorway, its paint faded by seasons of wind. Inside, the faint glow of candlelight flickers through a window. Someone is already awake, perhaps counting coins, perhaps whispering prayers, perhaps simply staring into the quiet before the day claims them. Your stomach tightens. Hunger here is not a dramatic crisis. It is a steady companion. You realize that breakfast will not be a leisurely ritual. It will be a calculation. What can be spared? What must be saved? How long until the next harvest? The questions hum beneath every movement like a low tune you cannot quite forget. A cart rattles past loaded with sacks that smell faintly of grain. The driver glances at the sky, measuring time in colour and cloud rather than in numbers on a clock. You follow his gaze. The sun finally pushes above the horizon, pale and determined. Light spills across the fields, turning dew into scattered sparks. For a moment, the scene almost feels beautiful. You can understand why later generations will remember this era with nostalgia. The simplicity, the closeness to the land, the sense that history itself is being written in footsteps and furrows. Then your foot sinks ankle deep into a patch of mud and the illusion breaks with a quiet splash. You laugh softly to yourself. It is either laugh or complain, and complaining would require more energy than you can spare. You continue walking, letting the sounds of waking life guide you forward. Somewhere ahead, a bell begins to ring, not urgently, not ceremoniously, just steadily, as if marking the fact that another day has begun and there is no point pretending otherwise. The path stretches onward. You feel both curious and slightly overwhelmed. This is not the tidy legend you expected. It is something rougher, more immediate, more human. You draw a slow breath and step into the light, ready to see what else this morning will reveal. You drift closer to the cluster of homes as the morning settles into its steady rhythm. The bell you heard a moment ago fades behind you, replaced by the quieter sounds of everyday life beginning in earnest. A door opens with a dry wooden groan. A woman steps outside carrying a small bundle of kindling pressed against her hip. She moves carefully down 2 uneven steps, her breath forming pale clouds in the cool air. You follow her with your eyes, curious, sensing that this ordinary doorway might reveal more about 1776 than any grand speech ever could. When you reach the threshold yourself, you pause. The structure looks fragile. The walls lean inward as though tired of holding themselves upright. Sunlight filters through narrow gaps between the boards, painting thin stripes across the packed earth outside. You brush your fingers against the wood. It feels rough, splintered, honest. Nothing here has been polished for visitors. Inside, the world becomes smaller. The ceiling presses low above you. Smoke from a recently tended hearth lingers in the air, curling lazily toward a darkened chimney. Your eyes adjust slowly. Shapes emerge from shadow. A table scarred by years of use. A bench worn smooth where countless bodies have rested. A bed tucked into one corner like an afterthought. You realize with a quiet jolt that this single room holds nearly everything a family owns. A well-known historical reality comes gently into focus. Most colonial homes in 1776 are modest structures built with practical urgency rather than aesthetic ambition. Comfort exists, but it is hard-earned and often temporary. You imagine winter nights when wind rattles the shutters and frost creeps along the inside of the walls. You imagine summer afternoons when heat gathers beneath the roof and refuses to leave. The woman you saw outside re-enters carrying her kindling. She nods toward you as if your presence requires no explanation. Visitors come and go. Survival does not pause for introductions. She kneels at the hearth and begins arranging the sticks with practiced efficiency. The faint scent of ash rises as she works. Soon a spark catches, then another. Flame grows slowly like confidence returning after doubt. You notice how carefully space is used. Hooks line the walls holding tools. bundles of dried herbs, a simple lantern. A chest near the bed serves as both storage and seat. Every object has more than one purpose, see. There is no room for decoration that does not also serve the body or the day ahead. You feel a sudden appreciation for the quiet ingenuity this requires. A child emerges from beneath a woolen blanket and rubs sleep from his eyes. He studies you with open curiosity. His hair sticks out in soft, uneven tufts. Without a word, he reaches for a small wooden toy resting near the hearth. It resembles a horse carved with loving imperfection. You recall reading that homemade toys were common in this era, crafted during rare moments of rest. This one bears the marks of patient hands and long winter evenings. The air warms as the fire strengthens. Smoke stings your throat but also brings a sense of comfort. You realize that warmth here is never taken for granted. It is built stick by stick, breath by breath. The woman stirs a pot suspended above the flames. A faint smell of porridge begins to fill the room. It is not a feast. It is fuel. A curious tidbit surfaces as you watch her work. Some households in this period reportedly hung bunches of certain herbs near the doorway, believing that they could ward off illness or bad fortune. You glance toward the entrance and notice a small cluster of dried leaves tied with twine. They rustle softly each time the door opens, as if whispering their quiet promise of protection. You move toward the bed and sit carefully on its edge. The straw mattress shifts beneath your weight with a faint crackling sound. It is thinner than you expected. You imagine how quickly sleep must claim anyone who lies here after a day of labour. There is little room for tossing and turning. Fatigue acts as its own lullaby. Voices drift in from outside. A man calls to someone across the yard. The reply carries a hint of laughter, then fades into the rhythm of chopping wood. You sense how closely lives are woven together in this place. Privacy is a rare luxury. Community is not always chosen. It simply exists like the weather. Scholars continue to debate whether the average colonial family experienced these living conditions as hardship or simply as the natural order of things. You consider the question while watching the child trace patterns in the dust near the hearth. Perspective shapes memory. What feels stark to you might feel ordinary to him. Perhaps comfort is defined less by walls and more by familiarity. The woman ladles steaming porridge into wooden bowls. She offers one to you with a small tired smile. You accept it gratefully. The heat seeps into your hands. Steam curls upward, carrying the mild scent of grain and smoke. You take a careful bite. The taste is plain but grounding. You feel anchored in the present moment, connected to a rhythm that predates modern distractions. Sunlight now slips through this doorway in a steady beam. Dust motes drift lazily within it like tiny planets. The room feels brighter though no larger. You realise that space here is measured not only in feet and inches, but in relationships, routines, shared endurance. Each object tells a quiet story. Each morning writes another line. You finish the last spoonful of porridge and set the bowl aside. Outside the day is gathering strength. Inside the fire crackles with renewed confidence. You stand slowly aware that this small house has already altered your understanding of the past. It is not the stage set you imagined. It is a living, breathing environment shaped by necessity and hope. You step back toward the doorway and glance once more at the low ceiling, the worn table, the child now laughing softly at his carved horse. The world beyond waits wide and uncertain. Yet here within these narrow walls, life feels both fragile and resilient. You draw a quiet breath and move into the growing light, ready to continue your journey through a morning that is still unfolding. You step back outside and feel the cool morning air wrap around you like a damp cloak. The small house behind you exhales another thread of smoke into the pale sky. Somewhere nearby, a cow lows with deep, patient insistence. Hunger seems to have a voice in this place. It echoes through fields, through kitchens, through the quiet calculations inside every mind you pass. Your own stomach tightens again, though you have just eaten. The porridge settles quickly, absorbed by a body that is walking more than resting. You begin to understand that food here is not simply nourishment. It is time itself, measured in spoonfuls and harvests. Each bite carries the unspoken question of when the next one will come. A faint clatter draws your attention toward a small yard where two women are bent over a wooden trough. They scrub cloth with brisk, determined movements. Water splashes onto the ground and darkens the soil in spreading shapes. You notice how carefully they work to conserve every drop. Fresh water is not assumed. It must be carried, stored, guarded. You recall a widely accepted historical detail that many colonial families rely on nearby well streams or rain collection for daily use. Cleanliness becomes an effort rather than a routine. The smell of baking drifts toward you, warm and unexpectedly inviting. You follow it to a crude outdoor oven shaped like a squat dome of clay. A man lifts its wooden door with a cloth wrapped around his hand. Steam escapes in a soft sigh. Inside, several small loaves of bread sit like quiet promises. He catches you watching and gives a quick nod. There is pride in his expression. Bread means security, at least for today. A curious story surfaces in your thoughts as you watch him work. Some communities are said to have experimented with unusual ingredients when wheat supplies ran low, mixing in ground acorns or even dried peas to stretch their flour. The results were not always pleasant, yet necessity rarely waits for approval. You imagine the taste. You imagine the relief of having something, anything to share at the table. You wander along a narrow path that skirts the edge of a field. Dew clings to your shoes and soaks slowly through the fabric. A group of children kneel among rows of young plants, their small hands tugging at weeds with serious concentration. There is no sense of play in their movements. You realize that childhood here includes responsibilities that would surprise many modern observers. Work begins early, not as punishment but as preparation. The sun climbs higher, revealing a wider landscape than you first noticed. Beyond the nearest trees lie more fields, more scattered homes, more signs of lives unfolding in parallel. Smoke rises from several chimneys at once, thin signals of breakfast fires catching hold. You feel as though you are walking through a quiet network of survival, each household connected by shared uncertainty. Historians still argue whether colonial diets were as monotonous as some records suggest, or more varied thanks to local ingenuity. You look around for clues. A woman passes you carrying a basket filled with what appear to be early spring greens. Their scent is sharp and fresh. Perhaps variety depends on season, on weather, on simple luck. Perhaps memory exaggerates hardship or softens it. A rooster struts across your path with theatrical confidence, scattering a handful of hens in his wake. You pause to let them pass. Their feathers brush lightly against your legs. For a moment you feel an odd companionship with these creatures. Like you, they are searching constantly for the next scrap, the next safe place to rest. You reach a small clearing where a rough table has been set beneath a tree. Several people gather around it, speaking in low voices. A pot sits at the center, sending up fragrant curls of steam. You sense hesitation as you approach. Then someone gestures for you to join them. Community here expands when it must. Solitude is rarely practical. You sit on a bench that creaks under shifting weight. A wooden bowl is placed in your hands. This time the contents are thicker, dotted with bits of root vegetable that have softened during long cooking. You taste carefully. The flavor is simple, earthy, reassuring. Conversation flows around you like a quiet stream. Words about weather, about livestock, about rumors of distant conflict. Independence is mentioned only once, and then, with a shrug that suggests uncertainty rather than celebration. You notice how people eat with focused attention. There is little distraction, no idle chatter. Every mouthful feels deliberate. You begin to mirror their pace, slowing your movements, listening to the rhythm of spoons against wood. Hunger teaches patience. It also teaches gratitude. A faint breeze stirs the leaves above you. Sunlight flickers across the table in shifting patterns. Someone laughs softly at a story you do not fully catch. The sound lifts your mood more than you expect. Even in this demanding world, moments of lightness find a way to surface. You think again about how the past is often portrayed as heroic or picturesque. Sitting here, you sense a different truth. Life in 1776 is built from repetition and resilience. Meals anchor the day. Fields dictate the future. Ideals of freedom exist alongside the pressing need to fill another bowl. As the group begins to disperse, you stand and stretch your stiff legs. The path ahead glows in the strengthening sunlight. Somewhere beyond the trees, more work awaits, more discoveries, more reminders that history is not only written in declarations and battles, but also in kitchens, gardens, and the quiet sharing of food. You take a final breath of the warm grain-scented air and step forward, letting the clearing fade behind you as the journey continues. You continue along the narrow path with the taste of simple stew still lingering at the back of your tongue. Morning has fully arrived now. Sunlight spreads across the land in long golden bands, warming the damp edges of fields and turning puddles into trembling mirrors. The day feels awake, purposeful, slightly impatient. You sense that this is the hour when appearances begin to matter, not in the theatrical way of later portraits, but in the quiet daily ritual of preparing yourself to face labour. A woman passes you carrying a bundle of garments draped over her arm. The fabric brushes lightly against your sleeve as she hurries by. You notice its texture immediately. Coarse, tightly woven, practical. Nothing about it invites comfort. Clothing here is less about style and more about endurance. You glance down at your own outfit and suddenly feel aware of seams of weight of the way material rests against skin. You pause near a fence where a man is adjusting his shirt with brisk, economical movements. He pulls it straight across his shoulders, tucks loose fabric into his breeches, then knots a length of cloth at his throat to keep out the lingering chill. His motions are habitual, almost mechanical. Dressing is not a performance. It is preparation, a small act of readiness before the real work begins. A well-documented reality from this period comes quietly to mind. Many garments in 1776 America are handmade within the household, or are obtained through local trade, rather than purchased from distant markets. Such a piece represents hours of spinning, weaving, cutting and mending. You imagine the patience required. You imagine the pride hidden within each sturdy stitch. Nearby, a young girl struggles to fasten the ties of her apron. Her fingers fumble with the knots. A woman kneels to help her, tightening the cloth with gentle firmness. The girl sighs, then stands taller, as though the simple act of being properly dressed has granted her new confidence. You realize how clothing can shape posture, mood, even identity. A breeze lifts the hem of your own sleeve and you feel the scratch of fabric against your wrist. It reminds you that comfort is not the goal here. Durability is. Wool and linen dominate this world, chosen for their ability to survive repeated wear and harsh weather. Softness is a rare luxury. You wonder how long it takes before skin simply accepts this constant irritation as normal. A curious observation floats into your thoughts as you watch a man patch the knee of his trousers with a careful concentration. Some families are known to pass garments down through several children, altering them again and again until the original shape becomes almost unrecognizable. Clothing evolves alongside the wearer, absorbing years of movement and memory. Each tier tells a quiet story of effort. You walk toward a line of laundry stretched between two rough posts. Shirts, skirts, stockings sway gently in the warming air. Sunlight shines through the thinner pieces, revealing places where fabric has been reinforced with extra stitching. Nothing is wasted. Even worn-out cloth may find new life as a cleaning rag or quilt fragment. Resourcefulness becomes a kind of unspoken art. As you reach out to touch one of the garments, you feel the lingering coolness of water that has not yet fully evaporated. Washing clothes is no quick task. It demands hauling heavy buckets, scrubbing stubborn stains, wringing out damp fibres until arms ache. You imagine the satisfaction that must come from seeing a line of freshly cleaned clothing fluttering like a small victory against the chaos of daily life. There is also a social dimension woven into these routines. People recognize one another by familiar patterns of dress. The cut of a coat, the colour of a kerchief, the neatness of a cuff. Status whispers through such details. Yet distinctions are often subtle, shaped more by care and condition than by extravagance. You begin to notice how eyes linger on frayed edges or well-maintained seams. Judgment here can be skewed but sharp. A phrase you once encountered in a history lecture resurfaces in your memory. Researchers continue to discuss how far colonial Americans consciously expressed identity through clothing rather than merely responding to necessity. You look around for evidence. A young man adjusts his hat at a slight angle before greeting a group of neighbours. The gesture seems deliberate. Perhaps even in this practical world there is room for quiet self-expression. The day grows warmer. Sweat gathers at the back of your neck beneath the collar. You understand why sleeves are rolled, why garments are loosened whenever possible. Flexibility matters. You feel a new reciprocate for the constant negotiation between body and fabric. Each movement requires awareness. Each task tests the limits of what cloth can endure. A child runs past you, trailing laughter and dust. His shirt hangs unevenly from one shoulder, where a button has come loose. No one rushes to fix it. There will be time for mending tonight, when light fades and hands seek something useful to do beside the fire. For now, the torn seam becomes part of the landscape, another small imperfection in a world that rarely pauses for tidiness. You find yourself thinking about how future generations will romanticize these garments in paintings and museums. Crisp white shirts, elegant waistcoats, flowing skirts caught in heroic poses. Standing here among the real textures and smells, you feel the distance between image and experience. Beauty exists, certainly, but it is tangled with sweat dust and the quiet discipline of maintenance. A final gust of wind lifts the laundry line into motion, turning cloth into a brief procession of shapes and shadows. You watch until the movement slows again. Then you smooth your own sleeve, adjust your collar, and step forward, ready to see how the day will continue to unfold. You move on with the faint scent of sun-warmed linen still clinging to your senses. The path widens slightly as it bends toward open ground where morning activity has gathered into something resembling order. The light now feels stronger, less forgiving. Shadows shorten, sound sharpen. You sense that this is the hour when hesitation fades and effort takes command. Ahead, a group of figures spreads across a field like slow-moving brushstrokes. Some guide ploughs through stubborn earth. Others stoop to tend fragile shoots just beginning to claim their place in the soil. The rhythm of work forms a kind of quiet music. Metal scrapes, wood creaks, breath rises and falls in steady patterns. You step closer and feel the vibration of labour beneath your feet. A widely recognised truth from this era settles gently into your thoughts. Most people in 1776 spend the majority of their waking hours engaged in physical work tied directly to survival. Farming, hauling, chopping, repairing. Tasks that leave little room for rest or reflection. The idea of leisure feels distant here, almost imaginary. You pause beside a man guiding a plough pulled by two patient oxen. He grips the handle with both hands, his shoulders set in determined tension. Each step forward demands strength and balance. The soil resists him, clinging to the blade as though reluctant to give way. You notice how his boots sink slightly with every movement. Mud becomes a constant companion. He does not complain. There is no audience for complaint. Nearby, a woman gathers stones from the edge of the field and stacks them carefully along a growing wall. Her hands move with quiet precision. You sense the history contained in this simple action. Removing obstacles, marking boundaries, shaping land that may never fully belong to anyone. Her face glistens with perspiration, yet her expression remains composed. Effort has become routine. A curious fragment of folklore drifts into your awareness as you watch her work. Some rural communities once believed that singing softly while performing repetitive tasks could encourage crops to thrive. You listen for a melody. At first you hear only wind and distant voices, then almost imperceptibly a hum races from the woman's lips. It blends with the sound of stones touching stone. Whether meant for the plants or for her own endurance, the tune seems to steady her pace. You walk further into the field and feel heat gathering beneath the growing sun. The smell of freshly turned earth fills your lungs. It carries hints of moisture and decay, the raw perfume of transformation. A boy not much older than the child you saw earlier drags a bundle of weeds toward a pile at the edge of the clearing. His movements are awkward but determined. Childhood here bends quickly toward responsibility. Somewhere in the distance, an axe strikes wood with measured force. The sound travels across the landscape in sharp, echoing pulses. You imagine the tree surrendering inch by inch. Timber will become beams, fences, firewood. Every resource extracted with muscle and patience. The scale of daily labour feels immense. Yet no one stops to marvel at it. This is simply life unfolding as it must. You wipe sweat from your brow and realise how easily fatigue begins to settle into your limbs. Even walking alongside these workers demands effort. You think of the long days that stretch ahead of them, shaped by seasons rather than by schedules. Time here is counted in sunlight and shadow, in a planting and harvest in this own slow arc of necessity. Researchers continue to examine how colonists balance communal cooperation with individual ambition in such environments. You look around for signs of rivalry or pride. A man pauses to help another lift a fallen branch. They exchange a brief nod before returning to their separate tasks. Solidarity appears practical rather than sentimental. Everyone benefits when work is shared. A cart rattles into view along the edge of the field, its wheels leaving deep impressions in the soft ground. Two girls guide it carefully toward a stack of bundled hay. Their laughter drifts across the space light and fleeting. For a moment the atmosphere softens. Even here, joy finds a way to surface between exertions. You lean against a rough fence and watch the scene unfold with growing respect. The myth of heroic speeches fades in comparison to the quiet heroism of endurance. These people are building futures one repetitive motion at a time. Their hands shape not only the land, but also the very idea of what survival requires. The sun climbs higher still. Heat presses down with increasing insistence. Shadows shrink until they cling tightly to the feet of those who cast them. You notice how workers adjust their pace without that discussion, conserving strength for the hours yet to come. Efficiency becomes instinctive. Waste is not an option. A breeze stirs at last, carrying with it the distant scent of water. Perhaps a stream waits beyond the rise ahead. The thought brings a flicker of relief. Thirst here is never far away. You begin to understand how every natural element becomes part of the daily calculation. Food, clothing, labour, and now the promise of refreshment. You straighten from the fence and take a final look across the field. Movement continues in steady waves. Ploughs advance, stones rise into walls, voices murmur. History breathes through these ordinary gestures. You feel both humbled and strangely energized by the realization. Turning toward the path that leads onward, you step away from the field and let the sounds of work fade gradually behind you. The journey continues, guided by the sunlight curiosity and the quiet determination to see this unfamiliar world as clearly as possible. You leave the open field behind and follow a narrow track that curves toward a cluster of buildings partly hidden by tall grass and low trees. The sun now stands higher, casting a bright clarity across everything it touches. The air feels warmer and more alive. You notice the hum of insects rising like a soft chorus. Somewhere nearby a door slams shut, followed by the sound of quick footsteps. Life here moves in constant motion, rarely pausing long enough to be admired. As you approach the settlement, you become aware of a different rhythm unfolding. This is not the broad, visible labour of ploughing or hauling. It is something more intricate, more contained. Women move between doorways and yards with purposeful energy. Their tasks overlap like threads in a tightly woven fabric. One tends a simmering pot while rocking a cradle with her foot. Another kneels to mend a torn sleeve while keeping watch on a group of children playing near a fence. A widely acknowledged aspect of colonial society comes quietly into focus. Women in 1776 often manage a wide range of responsibilities within the household and beyond it, balancing domestic work production and community care. Their efforts sustain not only individual families, but also the fragile networks that allow settlements to endure. You sense the weight of this reality in every swift practice motion you observe. You pause beside a small garden where a woman gathers herbs into a basket. The scent rises sharp and green in the warming air. She crushes a leaf between her fingers and brings it briefly to her nose as though confirming its strength. You realise that knowledge here is often passed through touch and memory, rather than through written instruction. Remedies, recipes, routines. Skills learned through repetition and quiet observation. A curious story from a local tradition drifts into your thoughts as you watch her work. Some communities once believed that planting certain herbs near the doorway could encourage harmony within the household. Whether symbolic or practical, such habits reveal the subtle ways hope finds expression in daily life. The woman glances up and smiles faintly, then returns to her tone. Renewed. Focus. Children dart around her like bright sparks, their laughter mingling with the rustle of leaves. One little girl carries a wooden spoon like a scepter, declaring herself queen of an imaginary kingdom. Another drags a rag doll across the dirt path, leaving a faint trail behind. Play exists here, but it shares space with expectation. You sense that even these moments of freedom are shaped by the demand waiting just beyond the horizon. You move closer to a doorway where another woman stands kneading dough on a broad wooden board. Her hands press and fold with rhythmic precision. Flour dust clings to her forearms, catching the sunlight in pale streaks. The motion seems almost meditative. You wonder whether such repetitive work provides a kind of mental refuge, a brief escape from worry from the constant awareness of what could go wrong. Researchers continue to explore how women navigated authority within households and communities during this period. You look for signs of decision-making. A young man approaches with a question about supplies. The woman pauses. Her kneading considers his words, then gives a firm instruction. He nods and departs without protest. Leadership here may not always be formal, yet it clearly exists. A breeze lifts the edge of a curtain hanging in the doorway, revealing shelves lined with jars and bundles of dried food. Preservation is both art and necessity. Each carefully stored item represents foresight against leaner times. You imagine long winter evenings when these provisions will determine whether families endure hardship with strength or fear. Further along the path, you encounter a group of women gathered around a spinning wheel. The soft whir of turning wood fills the air like a gentle heartbeat. One guides fibres through her fingers, while another winds finished thread onto a spindle. Their conversation flows in low, steady tones. News travels through such gatherings. Stories, advice, warnings. Community forms not only through shared work, but also through shared words. You sense a quiet resilience in these scenes. There is little room for dramatic gestures. Instead, strength appears in consistency, in the ability to manage countless small tasks without losing sight of the larger purpose. You begin to understand that the myth of independence often overlooks these unseen contributions. Freedom depends as much on steady hands as on bold declarations. The afternoon light shifts subtly, deepening in colour as clouds drift across the sky. Shadows stretch longer once more. A baby begins to cry somewhere inside one of the houses. The sound carries urgency but also familiarity. Someone will respond quickly. Someone always does. Responsibility here is collective, even when burdens feel personal. You pause at the edge of the settlement and take a slow breath. The scent of baking bread mingles with that of drying herbs and warm earth. You feel surrounded by evidence of endurance, of quiet determination shaping each passing hour. The journey has already altered your expectations. You sense there is much more to learn. Turning toward the path that leads onward, you step away from the hum of spinning wheels and the murmur of voices. The sun glows softly through the drifting clouds. Ahead, new scenes await, ready to reveal how life in this unfamiliar year continues to unfold. You leave the soft whir of spinning wheels behind and continue along a path edged with tall weeds that brush against your knees. The afternoon light has mellowed into a warmer shade, as though the day itself has taken a deeper breath. Voices echo faintly from the settlement you have just passed, then dissolve into the broader quiet of open land. Ahead you notice movement again, quicker, this time less measured than the steady labour of adults. A cluster of children gathers near a fallen tree that lies like a natural bench across a shallow dip in the ground. They scramble over its rough surface with surprising agility. Bare feet grip bark and soil. Small hands reach for balance. Their laughter rings out in sudden bursts, bright as birdsong. You slow your pace, curious. Childhood here feels both familiar and entirely different. A commonly accepted historical observation drifts gently into your thoughts. In 1776, many children begin contributing to household work at an early age, learning skills through daily participation rather than through structured schooling. Education happens in fragments, in fields, kitchens, workshops. You sense that knowledge here is practical, immediate, shaped by necessity rather than by abstract theory. One boy leaps from the log and lands in a patch of grass with a triumphant shout. He carries a slingshot tucked into his belt like a badge of honour. You wonder how many hours he has spent practicing his aim, preparing not only for play, but for future responsibilities that may require precision and nerve. He notices you watching and grins as though inviting you to share in the simple victory of the moment. Nearby, a girl kneels beside a small pile of gathered twigs, arranging them carefully as though constructing a miniature house. Her brow furrows with concentration. You realise that imitation forms a quiet bridge between childhood and adulthood here. Games mirror real tasks. Pretend cooking, pretend building, pretend tending. Each playful gesture carries the seeds of future duty. A curious recollection surfaces as you observe them. Some colonial families are said to have used storytelling as a way to teach children about danger, weaving cautionary tales into evening routines. Wolves that lurk beyond the tree line. Rivers that claim the careless. Fire that can both warm and destroy. You imagine how imagination itself becomes a tool for survival. You walk closer and feel the ground change beneath your feet. Grass gives way to packed dirt scored by countless footsteps. This clearing serves as both playground and workspace. A group of older children hauls a bucket from a shallow well at its edge. Their movements are coordinated, almost professional. You sense pride in their efficiency. To be useful here is to be valued. From somewhere behind you comes the steady cluck of hens, followed by the sharper call of a woman summoning her young. The sound carries authority without harshness. A few of the children glance toward the settlement, measuring how much time remains before duty interrupts their brief freedom. You recognize the universal tension between play and responsibility. It feels more pronounced in this place where each hour has weight. A thoughtful question once raised by historians returns to your mind. To what extent did colonial children experience their early years as carefree or constrained? Watching them now, you sense both realities existing side by side. Joy flashes easily across their faces, yet it is tempered by awareness. They know what is expected. They know that laughter must eventually yield to labour. The sun slips behind a passing cloud and the clearing falls into softer shadow. For a moment, the atmosphere changes. The children lower their voices instinctively as though the dimming light has whispered a reminder. A boy retrieves a small wooden whistle from his pocket and blows a hesitant note. The sound floats upward, thin and haunting. You feel a ripple of melancholy without quite understanding why. You sit on the fallen tree and let your gaze wander. Scattered objects reveal the texture of daily learning. A basket half filled with berries, a length of rope coiled neatly beside a pile of stones, a crude fishing pole leaning against the trunk. Skills accumulate quietly. By the time these children reach adulthood, their hands will already know countless tasks by heart. The cloud passes. Sunlight returns in a bright spill across the clearing. Energy rises again. A game resumes. Someone races toward the well, splashing a handful of cool water onto his face. Droplets sparkle briefly before vanishing into the dust. You smile at the simple pleasure. Even here, moments of relief matter. Gradually, the gathering begins to dissolve. One by one, the children drift away, called back by unseen schedules. The girl with the twig house gives it a final careful touch before standing. The boy with the slingshot tucks it securely into his belt. Their footsteps fade along narrow paths that lead toward kitchens, fields, barns. Childhood folds itself neatly into the fabric of the afternoon. You rise from the fallen tree and brush stray bark from your hands. The clearing feels quieter now, though echoes of laughter linger like warmth after a fading fire. You sense that you have witnessed something essential. Growth here is swift-shaped by expectation yet softened by fleeting bursts of play. Turning once more toward the road that stretches ahead, you continue your journey. The light shifts again as the day moves forward, inviting you to discover how community life unfolds beyond the boundaries of childhood. You leave the quiet clearing behind and follow a path that feels more worn than the others pressed flat by countless passing feet. The air grows richer with unfamiliar scents. Wood smoke lingers as always, but now it mingles with the sharper notes of fermented grain and roasting meat. Voices carry farther here, rising and falling in lively waves. You sense that you are approaching a different kind of gathering place, one shaped less by fields and chores and more by conversation and exchange. A low building comes into view at the edge of a crossroads. Its roof slopes unevenly. A faded sign sways gently above the door, creaking with each small gust of wind. A few horses stand tethered nearby, their tails flicking lazily at persistent flies. You pause for a moment, taking in the scene. This is not the grand tavern of romantic imagination. It is sturdy, practical, alive with movement. Inside, the air feels warmer and thicker. Candlelight flickers across rough wooden beams darkened by years of smoke. A handful of tables crowd the narrow space, their surfaces scarred by knives, mugs, and restless hands. Men and women sit shoulder to shoulder, their voices blending into a constant murmur. The sound reminds you of a stream flowing over stones. Steady, unpredictable, full of hidden currents. A well-established detail about this period settles into your awareness. Taverns in colonial America often serve as social hubs where news, trade, and political discussion converge. Here, information travels quickly, carried by travelers and merchants who bring stories from distant towns. You notice how heads turn whenever the door opens, how ears tilt toward unfamiliar accents. You find a place along the wall and observe quietly. A man leans forward across a table, his brow furrowed as he describes events unfolding far beyond this modest room. Words like Congress and militia drift through the air. Some listeners nod with interest. Others shrug, more concerned with the price of flour or the condition of the next harvest. The grand narrative of revolution feels unevenly distributed. A curious fragment of local colour surfaces as you watch a woman pour ale into a row of mismatched cups. In some taverns, regular patrons are known to carve small marks into the table to track their unpaid drinks, a rough system of credit born from trust and necessity. You glance down and notice faint lines etched into the wood near your elbow. Each one represents a promise that will eventually need to be honoured. The smell of stew rises from a pot simmering near the hearth. You feel your appetite stir again despite the meal you shared earlier. Hunger here never seems fully satisfied. A young server moves between tables with practiced agility, balancing bowls and mugs as though performing a quiet dance. Her presence reminds you that work does not pause even in spaces meant for rest. Conversation grows louder as the afternoon deepens. Someone begins recounting a recent journey along the river, describing muddy banks and unpredictable currents. Another voice interrupts with a tale of lost livestock found wandering miles from home. Laughter follows. You sense how storytelling weaves communities together, transforming hardship into shared experience. Researchers continue to consider how such gathering places shaped public opinion during the Revolutionary era. Listening now, you realize that persuasion here is subtle. Ideas spread through repetition, through casual remarks exchanged over warm drinks. Agreement forms gradually, like sediment settling at the bottom of a glass. You notice how clothing and posture signal unspoken hierarchies even in this relaxed environment. A man in a well-fitted coat speaks with confident authority. Others lean closer to catch his words. Nearby, a farmer with dirt still clinging to his boots listens in thoughtful silence. Status may soften at the tavern table, yet it does not entirely disappear. A sudden gust pushes the door open and sends a swirl of cooler air across the room. With it comes the distant sound of wagon wheels grinding along the road. Travel never stops. New faces arrive carrying fresh rumours and fresh fatigue. You feel the pulse of a world in transition, one that balances tradition with the uncertain promise of change. You accept a cup of ale offered by the server. The liquid tastes sharp and slightly bitter, yet oddly comforting. It warms your chest as you sip. Around you, conversation continues to ebb and flow. Disagreements spark then fade. Alliances form over shared laughter. The tavern becomes a living map of relationships drawn in voices rather than ink. As daylight begins to soften outside, candle flames glow more brightly within. Shadows lengthen across the floor. Someone starts a quiet song near the hearth, its melody rising above the murmur like a thin thread of light. For a moment, the room feels almost peaceful, suspended between effort and rest. You finish your drink and set the cup aside. The crossroads beyond the door waits in gathering dusk. You sense that the journey must continue, guided now by stories heard and impressions gathered. Stepping back into the cooling air, you leave the warmth of the tavern behind and follow the fading light toward whatever the evening will reveal. You step away from the crossroads and feel the shift immediately. The air outside the tavern carries a quieter tone, as though the land itself prefers reflection to noise. Evening begins its slow descent across the fields. Light softens into muted shades of amber and grey. A distant bell tolls once then again, marking time in a language older than clocks. You follow the path that leads gently uphill, guided by the faint glow of lanterns appearing one by one in the growing dusk. As you walk, the world seems to draw inward. Voices from scattered homes drift toward you in fragments. A prayer murmured over supper, a child reciting a verse learned by heart, the crackle of firewood shifting in a hearth. You sense that faith here is not reserved for grand buildings alone. It seeps into kitchens, into fields, into the quiet spaces between thoughts. A familiar historical understanding comes softly into focus. Religion plays a significant role in shaping everyday decisions for many people in colonial America. Church attendance, moral expectations, and the belief in divine guidance influence both personal behavior and the community norms. You feel this presence not as a heavy rule, but as a steady current flowing beneath the surface of life. The path narrows as it winds between low stone walls. Moss clings to the rocks, cool and damp beneath your fingertips when you brush against them. A faint scent of earth and leaves rises from the ground. Somewhere nearby, an owl calls its voice, echoing like a question across the twilight. You pause, listening. Even nature seems to participate in the evening ritual. A small meeting house appears ahead, simple in design yet quietly dignified. Its windows glow with candlelight. You move closer and hear the soft murmur of a gathering inside. The door stands slightly ajar. Through the opening, you glimpse rows of wooden benches filled with bowed heads and folded hands. The atmosphere feels solemn but not oppressive. It carries the comfort of shared belief. An unusual recollection surfaces as you linger outside. Some communities once interpreted natural events such as sudden storms or unexplained illnesses as signs of divine warning. This blending of spiritual meaning with everyday experience creates a landscape rich in symbolism. You imagine how such interpretations might shape choices, instill caution, or offer reassurance in uncertain times. You continue along the wall and notice small tokens left on its surface. A sprig of wildflower tied with thread, a smooth stone arranged with deliberate care. Acts of quiet devotion that may never be recorded in any official history. You realize that faith is often expressed through gestures too subtle for grand narratives. Scholars continue to discuss how deeply religious belief influenced political loyalties during this turbulent year. As you reflect on this, you hear voices rising in song from within the meeting house. The melody drifts into the evening air, gentle and unwavering. It feels like a bridge between hope and fear, between the known present and an uncertain future. Further along the path, you encounter a family gathered around a small outdoor fire. They sit close together, their faces illuminated by flickering light. The eldest member speaks slowly, recounting a story from earlier times. The children listen with wide eyes. You sense that storytelling here serves both as entertainment and as moral instruction, guiding behaviour through shared memory. You sit for a moment on a nearby stone and watch the sparks rise into the darkening sky. Each glowing fragment fades quickly, leaving only the steady burn of the coals. The scene feels timeless. You realise that belief systems like these embers require careful tending to endure. A breeze stirs the branches overhead, carrying with it the scent of distant rain. The possibility of change hangs in the air. You feel a quiet tension beneath the calm surface of evening. Faith offers comfort, yet it also frames uncertainty. It shapes how people interpret both fortune and hardship. Gradually the singing from the meeting house subsides. Doors open, figures emerge into the night, speaking in low, thoughtful tones. Lanterns sway gently as they begin the walk home. You rise and follow at a respectful distance, letting their presence guide you along the dim path. The stars begin to appear faint at first, then brighter as darkness deepens. Each one seems to mark a promise or a question. You draw your cloak closer around your shoulders, aware that the night holds its own lessons. With steady steps you continue onward, ready to discover what lies beyond the reach of candlelight. You follow the slow procession of lantern light until the figures ahead of you gradually disperse along separate paths. Night settles more fully now. The sky deepens into a wide canopy of dark blue scattered with stars that seem almost startling in their brightness. Without the glare of modern light, the heavens appear vast and immediate, as if leaning closer to listen. You draw a careful breath. The air has cooled. A faint dampness clings to your sleeves. Ahead, a single candle flickers in the window of a small building set slightly apart from the others. Its door stands open, revealing shadows that shift gently with each movement inside. You hesitate at the threshold, aware that this place holds a different kind of significance. Illness and injury gather quietly in such spaces, shaping lives as surely as harvests and wars. Inside, the scent of herbs greets you first. It is sharp and earthy, mingled with the subtler aroma of smoke and warm wax. Shelves line the walls, crowded with jars filled with dried leaves, roots and curious mixtures whose purposes you can only guess. A wooden table stands at the centre of the room. A man lies upon it, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow, but steady. Nearby, a woman works with calm concentration, crushing something in a mortar with rhythmic care. A well-recognised historical understanding emerges in your thoughts. Medical care in 1776 is often improvised, shaped by local knowledge, limited training, and a blend of practical skill with inherited tradition. Formal doctors exist, yet many communities rely on midwives or healers whose experience comes from observation and necessity. You sense both dedication and uncertainty in the atmosphere. The woman glances toward you briefly, then returns to her task. She lifts the freshly ground mixture and adds it to a steaming bowl of water. Vapor rises, carrying a scent that makes your eyes sting. She places the bowl beside the patient and adjusts a cloth across his forehead. Each movement feels deliberate, measured, guided by hope as much as by technique. An unusual piece of lore drifts into your awareness as you watch. Some households are known to hang charms or small tokens near the bed of a sick family member, believing that protection could be invited as well as earned. You notice a thin cord tied to the bedpost holding a carved wooden pendant. It sways gently whenever the man shifts. You step closer and observe the healer's hands. They bear the marks of years spent in service. Fine scars trace pale lines across her knuckles. Her fingers move with steady assurance, yet you sense the quiet weight she carries. Outcomes here are never guaranteed. Even minor ailments can become serious. Even careful treatment may not bring recovery. Beyond the open door, the sound of crickets rises in a continuous chorus. It fills the silence between breaths. You realize how fragile the boundary feels between life and loss in this era. A fever, a fall, a sudden infection. Each can alter the course of a family's future. You feel a subtle tension in your chest and awareness that health here is not assumed but negotiated daily. Researchers continue to examine how colonists balance scientific curiosity with traditional remedies. You notice a small book resting on a nearby stool, its pages worn and stained from frequent use. Perhaps it contains notes, perhaps copied instructions passed from one generation to the next. Knowledge accumulates slowly in such places carried by memory and careful experimentation. The patient stirs and murmurs something you cannot quite hear. The healer leans closer, listening. She offers a few quiet words, in response her voice low and reassuring. Comfort itself becomes a form of medicine. You sense that emotional steadiness may matter as much as any herbal mixture. A gust of wind brushes through the doorway, causing the candle flame to dance wildly for a moment. Shadows leap across the walls, transforming the room into a shifting landscape of light and darkness. You feel a chill along your spine. Night magnifies uncertainty. It also sharpens the senses. Gradually the man's breathing deepens. The healer allows herself a small nod of satisfaction. She turns to rearrange the jars on the shelf, preparing for whatever challenge might come next. You recognize resilience in her quiet routine. This is not a dramatic battle. It is an ongoing vigil. You step back towards the door and glance once more at the scene. The carved pendant sways gently. The bowl of steaming herbs releases its steady fragrance. Outside, the stars burn with distant clarity. You feel both humbled and strangely comforted by the knowledge that care persists even in the face of limited means. Drawing your cloak closer against the cooling night, you leave the small building behind and return to the path. The journey continues under the watchful gaze of the sky, inviting you to discover what other truths lie hidden in the hours ahead. You move away from the healer's doorway and continue beneath a sky that feels endlessly wide. The stars stretch from horizon to horizon like a quiet map drawn in silver light. For a moment you stand still and let your eyes adjust. Without street lamps or glowing windows to compete with them, the constellations appear almost close enough to touch. The night air carries the faint scent of damp grass and distant water. Somewhere beyond the rise ahead you sense the promise of a river or stream. Your path descends gradually into a darker hollow, where the ground becomes uneven and tangled with roots. You tread carefully, guided by the pale shimmer of moonlight filtering through branches. Each step produces a soft crunch of gravel or dry leaves. Travel here is never effortless. Movement itself demands patience and attention. You begin to understand how distance in this era is measured not only in miles, but in endurance. A familiar historical understanding comes gently to mind. Roads in 1776 are often little more than rutted tracks shaped by repeated passage rather than by deliberate construction. Wagons carve deep grooves into the soil. Rain transforms pathways into mud. Journeys that appear short on a modern map can require hours or even days to complete. You feel the truth of this in the slow progress of your own footsteps. The hollow opens suddenly onto a clearing where a narrow river glides through shadow. Its surface reflects the stars in trembling fragments. A small wooden bridge crosses the current, its planks worn smooth by countless crossings. You pause at its edge and listen. Water murmurs over hidden stones, a steady whisper that feels both soothing and slightly ominous. Crossing such places after dark must test even the most experienced traveller. An unusual anecdote drifts into your thoughts as you study the bridge. Some colonial communities reportedly believe that rivers possessed moods of their own, capable of granting safe passage one day and demanding caution the next. Whether metaphor or genuine conviction, this idea reflects the deep respect people hold for natural forces that cannot be easily controlled. You place your hand on the rough railing and feel the faint vibration of flowing water beneath. Halfway across you notice a lantern swinging gently from a post at the far end. Its flame flickers, casting uncertain circles of light. A wagon waits nearby, its driver dozing on the seat while his horses stand with heads lowered in quiet patience. Travel often requires such pauses. Rest becomes a necessary companion on long routes that wind through forest and field. You greet the driver softly. He startles awake, then offers a weary nod. His face is lined with dust and fatigue. He speaks of distant towns and predictable weather of goods that must arrive before markets close. You sense the complexity of a world connected by fragile threads of trade and communication. Information moves slowly. Supplies move slower still. Scholars continue to explore how these challenges shaped regional identities during the revolutionary period. Listening to the driver's brief account, you realize that geography itself influences perspective. A settlement separated by miles of rough terrain may feel like a different country. Loyalties and priorities shift with the landscape. You step off the bridge and follow a path that hugs the riverbank. Moonlight glints off ripples guiding your way. A chorus of frogs rises from the reeds, their voices blending into a rhythmic pulse. You feel both comforted and slightly uneasy. Nature here is companion and obstacle at once. Further along, you encounter a group of travellers gathered around a small fire. Their wagon wheels lean against a tree removed for repair. Sparks drift upward like fleeting stars. The travellers share simple food and stories of the road. You notice how quickly strangers form temporary alliances when circumstances demand it. Hospitality becomes a survival skill rather than a mere courtesy. You sit with them briefly, warming your hands at the fire. The smell of smoke mingles with that of damp leather and fresh-cut wood. Someone offers you a slice of bread and a sip of cool river water. You accept gratefully. Even the smallest kindness feels significant after hours of solitary walking. A breeze stirs the flames, sending shadows dancing across the clearing. You sense that night travel carries its own rhythm, quieter but no less demanding than the day's labour. Each step forward requires trust in the path in the stars and the goodwill of those you meet along the way. When you rise to continue your journey, the travellers wish you safe passage. Their voices fade behind you as you follow the river's curve toward higher ground. The lantern light dwindles, replaced once more by the vast glow of the sky. You walk on aware that every mile reveals another layer of this unfamiliar world where distance shapes destiny and movement defines experience. You climb gradually away from the riverbank, feeling the ground firm beneath your boots as the path leads toward higher terrain. The night is still deep, yet a faint paling along the eastern horizon suggests that dawn is already preparing its quiet return. You walk through a stretch of woodland where tall trunks rise like pillars around you. Leaves whisper softly overhead. Somewhere in the darkness a branch snaps under the weight of an unseen animal. You pause, listening. In this landscape, even small sounds carry meaning. As the trees begin to thin, a new scene emerges before you. A scattering of buildings surrounds a wide open space that might generously be called a marketplace. Wagons stand in uneven rows. Barrels and crates form makeshift stalls. Lanterns flicker beside piles of goods waiting to be exchanged. The air holds a mixture of scents that stir your curiosity. Leather tobacco, fresh hay, and the faint sweetness of dried fruit. You sense that trade here is both necessity and spectacle. A well-established historical reality comes quietly into focus. Markets in colonial America operate irregularly, shaped by harvest cycles, weather conditions, and the unpredictable arrival of traders. Supplies may be abundant one week and scarce the next. This uncertainty encourages a culture of bargaining and careful planning. You feel it in the tension that hums beneath the surface of every transaction. You wander between the stalls, observing the early stirrings of commerce. A woman arranges folded cloth with meticulous care, smoothing each piece as though preparing it for inspection. Nearby, a man lifts the lid of a crate to reveal a small collection of metal tools. Their polished edges catch the lantern light, promising efficiency to those who can afford them. You notice how buyers handle such items with reverence, weighing cost against need. A curious anecdote drifts into your thoughts as you watch. Some traders are known to travel with portable scales and sets of weights, ensuring that each exchange feels fair in a world where trust must often be negotiated. You spot one such scale balanced carefully on the wooden counter. Its brass pans sway gently with each breath of wind. Accuracy becomes a form of reassurance. The eastern sky brightens further, casting a pale glow across the gathering crowd. Voices grow louder. Greetings are exchanged. News travels quickly through this open space, carried by merchants who have journeyed far from their homes. You catch fragments of conversation about shortages in one region and unexpected abundance in another. Trade routes form invisible lines of connection across the colonies. Researchers continue to examine how reliance on credit shapes economic relationships during this period. You notice a farmer accepting goods in exchange for a written promise to pay later. The scrap of paper changes hands with solemn ceremony. Trust here is both fragile and essential. Without it, markets would collapse into silence. You pause beside a stall displaying baskets of preserved apples. Their scent is sharp and inviting. The vendor offers you one with a friendly nod. You take a bite and taste a blend of sweetness and tang that feels almost luxurious after days of simpler fare. Preservation techniques like drying and smoking extend the life of food, allowing communities to endure seasons of scarcity. Each method reflects ingenuity born from necessity. Nearby, a group of young men unload sacks of grain from a wagon. Dust rises in soft clouds around their boots. They work with practiced coordination, passing each heavy bundle from hand to hand. Efficiency here is not only admired, it is required. Time at market is limited. Deals must be struck before the sun climbs too high. You sense subtle hierarchies at play in this bustling space. Those with abundant goods command attention. Those with little to offer move quietly at the edges, hoping for favourable exchanges. Yet there is also a sense of shared purpose. Markets bring people together in ways that fields and forests cannot. They create temporary communities bound by mutual dependence. As daylight strengthens, colour returns to the scene. Reds and blues of woven cloth, the deep brown of polished leather, the golden sheen of honey stored in glass jars. You realise how trade enriches not only material life but also imagination. New objects introduce new possibilities, new desires. Even in a year defined by political upheaval, daily commerce continues its steady dance. A bell rings somewhere at the edge of the square, signalling the formal beginning of the day's transactions. Movement intensifies. Coins clink. Voices rise in negotiation. You feel the pulse of economic life beating beneath the broader narrative of revolution. Survival here depends as much on successful trade as on ideological conviction. You step back from the busiest stalls and take a final look at the unfolding marketplace. The eastern sky now glows with full morning light. Shadows retreat. The promise of another demanding day stretches ahead. With renewed awareness, you turn toward the path that leads onward, ready to discover how liberty itself will reveal its complicated boundaries in the hours to come. You leave the growing bustle of the marketplace behind and follow a road that leads toward a quieter stretch of countryside. Morning light spreads across the fields in wide, gentle waves. The sounds of bargaining and clinking coins fade until only the whisper of wind through tall grass remains. You sense that the next part of your journey will reveal truths that feel heavier, more complicated than the scenes of trade and simple labour you have witnessed so far. The path curves past a large farmhouse set back from the road. Its whitewashed walls gleam faintly in the sun. A fence surrounds several outbuildings where movement catches your eye. At first, you notice only the routine of work. Figures carrying water sweeping dirt from thresholds guiding animals toward pasture. Then you begin to recognize subtle differences in posture and pace. Some people move with quiet authority, others with cautious attention as though measuring each step against unseen expectations. A widely acknowledged reality from this era comes softly into your awareness. In 1776, the ideal of liberty coexists with systems of forced labour and social hierarchy that limit freedom for many. Enslaved individuals, indentured servants and hired workers often live and toil within structures that grant them little control over their own futures. You feel the weight of this contradiction settling around you like a shadow that refuses to lift. You slow your pace and watch as a young man carries a bundle of firewood toward the main house. His shoulders are straight, but his gaze remains lowered. When another figure calls his name, he responds immediately, setting down the wood and hurrying across the yard. Obedience here feels practice shaped by necessity and by rules that have been repeated so often they seem to echo in the air itself. Nearby, a woman kneels beside a patch of vegetable, tending the soil with steady concentration. A child plays quietly at her side, tracing shapes in the dust. Their closeness suggests both resilience and vulnerability. You sense that family bonds provide strength even when circumstances restrict personal choice. Survival often depends on holding tightly to whatever connections remain. An unusual detail from historical accounts surfaces as you observe this scene. Some enslaved communities are known to preserve cultural traditions through music storytelling and shared rituals, maintaining identity despite harsh conditions. You listen carefully and catch the faint rhythm of a song carried on the breeze. Its melody feels both mournful and hopeful, a quiet declaration that spirit can endure where freedom does not. You walk toward the edge of the property where a small path leads into open fields. The land stretches wide and sunlit, yet the sense of constraint lingers. You begin to understand how liberty in this year is experienced unevenly shaped by race, wealth, and social position. Ideals proclaimed in distant halls do not always translate into daily reality. Scholars continue to debate how the individuals navigated these contradictions in their personal beliefs and relationships. As you reflect on this, you notice a conversation unfolding near the barn. A landowner speaks with measured authority, while a group of labourers listen in attentive silence. Negotiation occurs, yet the balance of power remains clear. Choices are similar. Expectations are firm. A breeze moves across the fields carrying the scent of hay and sun-warmed earth. You pause to take it in, feeling both the beauty and the tension of the landscape. The same soil that nurtures crops also anchors systems of inequality. History here feels layered, each truth resting upon another. Further along the road, you encounter a small gathering of travellers resting beneath a stand of trees. Their clothing suggests varied backgrounds. Some speak of opportunities in distant towns. Others warn of obstacles that await those who seek independence without resources. Their stories remind you that mobility itself can be a form of privilege in this uncertain world. You sit briefly in the shade and watch clouds drift slowly across the sky. The scene feels peaceful at first glance, yet beneath the calm surface you sense currents of change beginning to stir. The promise of revolution carries hope for some and apprehension for others. No single perspective can capture the full complexity of this moment. As you rise to continue your journey, the farmhouse fades into the distance behind you. The road ahead glows with midday light. You carry with you a deeper awareness of the boundaries that shape life in 1776, boundaries both visible and unseen. With steady steps you move forward, prepared to explore how the edges of settlement and the presence of older homelands will further challenge the simple myths of this era. You follow the road as it narrows into something more uncertain, less shaped by wagons and more by wandering footsteps. The land begins to change around you. Fields give way to rough clearings dotted with stumps and scattered logs. Smoke rises from distant fires that do not belong to farmhouses. The air feels heavier here, carrying a quiet tension that presses gently against your senses. You realize that you are approaching the edges of settlement where different worlds meet and sometimes clash. The path slopes downward into a wide stretch of forest. Sunlight filters through tall branches in shifting patterns of gold and shadow. You walk more slowly now, attentive to the unfamiliar rhythm of this place. Birdsong sounds sharper. The rustle of leaves carries a deeper significance. Every step feels like an introduction to a landscape shaped long before colonial roads appeared. A commonly accepted historical insight settles into your thoughts. Many regions of North America in 1776 remain homelands of indigenous nations whose cultures, economies, and political systems predate European settlement by centuries. Their presence is often misunderstood or overlooked in simplified accounts of this era. You sense this truth not as an abstract concept, but as a living reality in the textures of the forest around you. Ahead, a small group of figures gathers near a stream. Their clothing differs from the styles you've seen in colonial towns. Patterns of beadwork catch the light. Leather garments move fluidly with each gesture. You pause at a respectful distance, aware that you are a visitor in more ways than one. Conversation flows in a language unfamiliar to your ears, yet its cadence feels confident and grounded. A curious cultural detail drifts into your awareness as you watch them prepare food over a low fire. Some communities are known to incorporate seasonal rituals into daily routines, honouring the cycles of nature through quiet gestures of gratitude. One of the figures lifts a handful of water and lets it fall back into the stream before joining the others. The motion feels deliberate and almost ceremonial. You continue along the path and notice signs of trade emerging in subtle forms. A bundle of animal pelts rests beside a stack of clay pots. Nearby, a colonial trader speaks with measured politeness, offering metal tools in exchange for furs. The negotiation unfolds with careful attention. Neither side rushes. You sense the complexity of relationships that blend cooperation with caution. Researchers often explore how alliances and conflicts between settlers and indigenous nations shaped the course of the revolutionary period. As you observe this exchange, you realize that loyalties here are fluid, influenced by the survival as much as by ideology. The forest itself seems to hold memories of past encounters, both peaceful and violent. The afternoon light shifts as clouds gather overhead, casting the clearing into softer tones. A sudden breeze stirs the leaves into restless motion. You feel the atmosphere tighten as though the land is reminding everyone of its power. Weather, like politics, remains unpredictable. Adaptation becomes a shared skill. Further along, you encounter a narrow trail marked by symbols carved into tree trunks. Their meanings are not immediately clear to you. Perhaps they guide travellers. Perhaps they mark boundaries. You run your fingers lightly across one of the carvings and feel the grooves worn smooth by time. Communication here extends beyond spoken language. It is written in landscape and memory. You pause beside a fallen log and listen to the distant murmur of voices fading into the forest. The world feels vast and interconnected in ways that challenge simple narratives of expansion. Settlement does not erase what came before. It layers new stories upon older ones, sometimes harmonizing, sometimes colliding. As the clouds part and sunlight returns, you rise and continue your journey toward higher ground. the trees thin, gradually revealing a wide view of rolling hills stretching into the distance. Smoke from scattered cabins curls upward in pale ribbons. Beyond them, deeper forests await holding histories yet to be understood. You take a final breath of the cool resin-scented air and step forward. The edges of this frontier have already reshaped your understanding of 1776. You sense that the coming hours will bring the revolution itself closer to your path, not as distant legend, but as lived disruption that reaches into homes and hearts alike. You continue along the ridge where the forest thins and the land opens into a patchwork of fields and scattered homesteads. The afternoon sun leans westward now, casting long amber shadows across fences and dirt lanes. A sense of calm lingers in the air at first glance, yet beneath that stillness, you begin to notice subtle disturbances. A cart abandoned near a gate, laundry left half gathered on a line, doors closed more tightly than before. Feels as though ordinary life has paused mid-breath. A commonly recognised truth about this year settles quietly into your thoughts. The Revolutionary War does not arrive everywhere with the dramatic clarity of battle lines. Often it appears gradually disrupting routines, altering prices, stirring suspicion among neighbours. You sense this disruption like a low vibration beneath your feet. You approach a farmhouse where a small group stands gathered in tense conversation. Their voices carry urgency. Words like patrol and supplies drift through the warm air. A man gestures toward the distant road, his expression drawn with concern. You follow his gaze and notice a faint column of dust rising on the horizon. Movement approaches, though its purpose remains uncertain. A curious recollection surfaces as you watch the group prepare. Some families in contested regions are said to hide valuables in unlikely places, burying coins beneath hearthstones or stitching documents into clothing seams. Such precautions reveal how conflict reshapes even the smallest domestic choices. You imagine the quiet anxiety that must accompany each decision. The dust cloud resolves slowly into the outline of mounted riders. They pass without stopping, their uniforms marked by the wear of travel. Faces remain guarded. You feel the tension ripple through the gathered villagers like wind through tall grass. War here is not always visible, yet its presence influences posture, tone, expectation. You move on and encounter a field where work continues despite the uncertainty. A woman cuts hay with steady determination, her scythe glinting in the slanting light. A child stacks the bundles behind her. Life cannot wait for perfect conditions. Crops must be gathered. Animals must be fed. Survival insists on routine even when fear hovers nearby. Researchers often examine how households balance loyalty to revolutionary ideals with the practical need to remain safe. As you reflect on this, you overhear a hushed debate near a barn. One voice speaks passionately about independence. Another counters with concern for trade and stability. Their words blend conviction with hesitation. Choices here carry consequences that may not be immediately clear. The air grows heavier as evening approaches. Clouds gather along the western sky, tinting the light with deeper shades of gold and rose. You sense a collective weariness settling over the land. Conflict stretches nerves thin. Each rumour becomes a possible threat. Each distant sound invites speculation. A wagon creaks past you loaded with hastily packed belongings. Children sit atop the bundles, their expression solemn. The driver keeps his eye fixed on the road ahead. Movement now signals not only commerce but also displacement. Some families choose to leave rather than risk what tomorrow might bring. You pause beside a stone wall and listen to the wind moving through dry grass. The landscape appears unchanged at first glance. Fields still ripple in the breeze, birds still circle overhead. Yet you know that beneath this familiar surface lives a shifting in response to forces far larger than any single household. A faint echo of musket fire reaches you from somewhere beyond the hills. It is distant enough to feel unreal, yet close enough to remind you that the struggle for independence is not merely an idea discussed in taverns. It is a lived disruption that reaches into kitchens, barns and bedrooms. As dusk deepens, lanterns begin to glow in scattered windows. Their light feels cautious, as though shielding itself from unwanted attention. You draw your cloak closer and continue along the road, aware that the night ahead may reveal the human cost of this unfolding revolution. With steady steps you move forward, carrying with you the realization that history here is written, not only in declarations, but in the quiet endurance of families striving to preserve a sense of normal life amid uncertainty. You continue down the dim road as evening settles more firmly across the countryside. The glow of scattered lanterns fades behind you, replaced by the colder shine of starlight. Ahead, a faint orange shimmer flickers against the horizon. At first you mistake it for another farmhouse fire. Then the smell reaches you. Wood smoke mixed with sweat-damp wool and something metallic you cannot quite name. You realize you are approaching a military encampment. The ground becomes more worn as you draw closer. Footprints overlap in dense patterns. Wheel ruts cut deep grooves into the soil. Canvas tents appear in uneven rows, their outlines shifting in the restless light of campfires. Voices carry across the clearing, some hushed, some sharp with fatigue. This is not the heroic tableau often imagined in paintings. It feels improvised temporary, alive with uncertainty. A well-known historical reality emerges quietly in your thoughts. Many soldiers in the Revolutionary War are ordinary labourers, farmers or apprentices who join militias with limited training and inconsistent supplies. You see this truth in their clothing and the way mismatched coats hang loosely from tired shoulders. Some boots are patched with scraps of leather. Others reveal toes pressed against worn seams. You move slowly between the tents, careful not to disturb those already asleep. A man sits near a fire, cleaning his musket with deliberate focus. The barrel gleams faintly in the shifting light. His hands tremble slightly, whether from cold or exhaustion you cannot tell. He glances up at you, nods once, then returns to his task. Discipline here is born from necessity rather than ceremony. A curious observation from personal diaries of the era surfaces as you watch the scene unfold. Soldiers sometimes nickname their weapons or equipment, treating them as companions during long campaigns. You notice a faint carving etched into the stock of a nearby rifle. Perhaps a name, perhaps a simple mark of ownership. Such gestures transform tools into symbols of endurance. Near another fire, a group of men share a pot of thin soup. Steam rises into the night air like a fragile promise of warmth. Their conversation drifts between humour and worry. One recounts a story of slipping in the mud during a recent march, drawing laughter from the others. Even in hardship, small moments of levity provide relief. You pause beside a stack of crates and feel the rough wood beneath your palm. Supplies appear limited. A torn blanket hangs from a makeshift line, drying slowly in the cool breeze. You sense how comfort here is measured in inches rather than luxuries. A full stomach, a dry place to sleep, a moment of quiet conversation. Each becomes precious. Historians often examine how morale shapes the outcome of prolonged conflict. As you observe the soldiers settling into uneasy rest, you realize that courage here is not always loud. It exists in persistence, in rising before dawn to march again, in maintaining faith that effort will lead somewhere meaningful. A young drummer boy sits apart from the others, tapping a slow rhythm on the rim of his instrument. The sound echoes softly through the camp like a heartbeat refusing to fade. You feel a sudden wave of empathy. Youth and war share an uneasy boundary in this place. The boy looks up at the sky, perhaps searching for constellations that remind him of home. The wind shifts, sending sparks swirling upward from the nearest fire. For a moment the entire clearing glows brighter. Faces become clearer. Lines of weariness deepen around eyes and mouths. You sense the toll of long marches and uncertain futures, yet you also notice determination lingering in posture and tone. You walk to the edge of the encampment and glance back. Tents stand like silent witnesses to history and progress. Weapons rest within arm's reach. Boots lie beside rolled blankets ready for sudden movement. The night holds its breath, waiting for whatever orders morning may bring. Turning away, you follow a narrow path that leads beyond the flickering light. The sounds of the camp diminish behind you. Crickets resume their steady chorus. Stars reclaim their quiet dominance over the sky. You continue onward with a deeper awareness of the human cost behind revolutionary ideals, knowing that the next stretch of your journey will reveal how plans unravel and loyalties are tested when reality refuses to follow expectation. You move beyond the fading glow of the encampment and feel the night grow quieter once more. The steady rhythm of distant drums dissolves into the soft murmur of wind across open ground. Ahead, a cluster of lights marks another settlement resting under the watchful sky. The path slopes gently downward toward it, lined with fences that cast long skeletal shadows in the moonlight. You walk with a sense of anticipation. After witnessing soldiers preparing for uncertain battles, you now sense that conflict may reveal itself in subtler forms. As you draw closer, you notice that not all doors are shut for the night. One farmhouse stands brightly lit, voices rising through its open windows. The sound is not joyous. It carries sharp edges of disagreement. You hesitate at the gate, aware that you are about to witness a different kind of struggle, one that unfolds within families rather than across fields. A widely accepted historical understanding comes quietly to mind. During the Revolutionary era, communities often divide along political lines, with some colonists supporting independence, while others remain loyal to the crown. These disagreements can fracture relationships that once felt unbreakable. You sense the weight of such divisions even before you step onto the porch. Inside, a group gathers around a heavy wooden table. Candles flicker, throwing restless shadows across determined faces. One man speaks passionately about the promise of self-governance. Another counters with equal intensity, warning of chaos and lost trade. Their words overlap, rising and falling like waves. A woman stands near the hearth, her hands clasped tightly as she listens. The tension feels personal, immediate. A curious detail from period accounts drifts into your thoughts as you observe. Some families reportedly hide political pamphlets or letters in secret compartments to avoid provoking suspicion from neighbours or authorities. You glance toward a chest in the corner, its lid slightly ajar. Perhaps it holds more than blankets and tools. Perhaps it guards opinions that cannot be spoken aloud in daylight. You shift your weight, and the floorboards creak softly beneath your boots. Several heads turn toward you. Conversation pauses for a brief awkward moment before resuming in lower tones. You realize how a trust becomes fragile when loyalties diverge. Even familiar faces may be viewed with new caution. Researchers continue to explore how these internal conflicts influence the broader course of the war. Listening now, you sense that ideology alone does not drive these arguments. Practical concerns surface repeatedly. Who will protect the farm if sons march away? How will goods reach market if trade routes close? Independence is both aspiration and risk. Outside, a dog begins to bark, its voice echoing across the quiet fields. The sound seems to punctuate each exchange inside the house. You feel a subtle unease settle in your chest. War does not always arrive with cannon fire. Sometimes it enters through whispered doubts and strained conversations around a supper table. You step back onto the porch and let the cooler night air soothe your thoughts. The stars shine with indifferent brilliance above the roofline. Somewhere nearby, another household sleeps undisturbed, unaware of the debate unfolding just beyond their view. You realize how unevenly conflict spreads, touching some lives deeply, while leaving others momentarily untouched. A lantern swings gently from a hook beside the door, its flame steady despite the breeze. You watch its light trace slow arcs across the wooden boards. It reminds you of the delicate balance this community now faces. Unity and division coexist, shifting with each passing day. When you finally turned away from the farmhouse, the path ahead feels heavier underfoot. You carry with you the echo of raised voices and unresolved questions. The journey continues through fields washed in silver light, guiding you toward a deeper understanding of how identity, status, and public image shape behavior in this uncertain world. You walk on beneath a sky that now feels both familiar and newly complex. The arguments you left behind linger in your thoughts like distant thunder. Ahead, the road widens into a gently sloping lane bordered by tidy hedges and carefully maintained fences. Lantern light glows warmly from a larger house, set back from the path. Its windows shine with an inviting steadiness that contrasts sharply with the tension you have just witnessed. You feel drawn toward it, curious to see how life unfolds where rank and reputation hold particular weight. As you approach, you notice subtle differences in the surroundings. The yard appears more orderly, tools are stacked neatly against a wall. A carriage stands beneath a simple shelter, its polished wheels reflecting the faint shimmer of starlight. Even the gravel beneath your boots sounds different here, less chaotic, as though arranged to signal refinement. A broadly accepted historical observation settles into your awareness. Social hierarchy in 1776 often reveals itself through clothing manners and material possessions. Wealth and influence shape not only economic opportunities but also public perception. You feel this distinction in the way figures move across the porch, their gestures measured, their voices composed. Inside, a gathering unfolds around a long table illuminated by several candles. Guests sit upright, hands folded neatly in their laps or resting lightly on polished wood. Conversation flows with careful courtesy. You hear discussions of land boundaries, trade prospects, and the uncertain political climate. The tone is restrained yet purposeful. Authority expresses itself through calm deliberation rather than raised voices. A curious detail from social customs of the time drifts into your thoughts. Some families reportedly practice specific forms of greeting or seating arrangement to reinforce status within the community. You observe how one gentleman rises to welcome a late arrival, guiding him toward a chair positioned closer to the head of the table. Such gestures carry meaning beyond simple hospitality. You move quietly along the wall, taking in the textures of the room. Fine fabrics drape across high-backed chairs. A silver cup catches the candlelight, its surface gleaming with quiet confidence. Even the air smells different here, touched by hints of polished wood and subtle perfume. You sense how environment shapes identity, reinforcing the invisible lines that separate classes. Researchers often examine how social performance influences loyalty during periods of upheaval. As you listen to the measured conversation, you realize that public image can become a form of protection. Maintaining composure, projecting stability, signaling refinement. These strategies help preserve influence when the world outside feels unpredictable. A young servant enters carrying a tray of steaming tea. Her movements are swift and unobtrusive. She sets each cup in place with practiced precision, then retreats without drawing attention. You notice how hierarchy governs even the smallest interactions. Roles are understood, expectations rarely questioned. Outside, the wind rises briefly, brushing against the shutters with a soft rattling sound. For a moment, the candle flames tremble. Shadows ripple across the walls. You sense how fragile these carefully maintained distinctions can be when confronted by forces beyond human control. Storms wars shifting alliances. Each has the power to rearrange the social landscape. You step back toward the doorway and glance once more at the composed faces gathered around the table. Their discussions continue thoughtful and deliberate. Plans are made, strategies considered, reputation guarded. This is another dimension of life in 1776, one shaped as much by performance as by principle. Returning to the lane, you feel the gravel crunch beneath your boots with renewed awareness. Status leaves its imprint not only on rooms and clothing, but also on the way people carry themselves through uncertainty. You continue along the road, guided by the pale glow of approaching dawn, ready to witness how night itself reshapes the rhythms of rest and reflection in the hours ahead. You leave the ordered quiet of the grander house behind and follow the lane as it bends toward open countryside once more. The night has deepened into that peculiar hour when even the insects seem to soften their song. Stars burn steadily overhead, yet a faint haze gathers along the horizon. You feel the day's long journey settling into your muscles. Fatigue moves through you like a slow tide. This is the time when most lives retreat indoors, when effort yields briefly to rest. Ahead, scattered points of candlelight mark the presence of modest homes tucked into the landscape. Their windows glow like small islands in a dark sea. You walk toward one such dwelling drawn by the quiet promise of shelter. The yard lies still except for the low rustle of a tethered animal shifting its weight. A wooden door creaks softly as someone steps outside to scatter ashes from the hearth. The smell of smoke lingers warm and faintly sweet. A familiar historical understanding comes gently into your thoughts. Evenings in 1776 often revolve around simple domestic routines, shaped by limited light and early rising. Candles and firewood are precious resources. Work continues only as long as visibility allows. Rest becomes essential preparation for another demanding dawn. You sense this rhythm in the deliberate pace of each movement around you. Inside the house, a family gathers near the hearth. Shadows flicker across their faces as flames rise and fall in a steady dance. One person stitches a torn garment with careful concentration. Another smooths straw across a mattress, arranging it for the night. The quiet industry of evening carries its own dignity. Tasks completed now will ease tomorrow's burdens. A curious recollection surfaces as you watch a child place a small object beneath his pillow before lying down. Some households are known to practice bedtime rituals believed to encourage protection or good fortune. Whether rooted in faith or simple comfort, such gestures reveal how uncertainty shapes even the most private moments. The boy closes his eyes with visible relief, trusting in the unseen. You take a seat near the fire and feel its warmth seep gradually into your tired limbs. The crackle of burning wood becomes a kind of lullaby. Outside, wind brushes against the walls in gentle waves. The contrast between interior calm and the vast darkness beyond feels profound. You realize how much energy is spent each day simply maintaining this fragile sense of safety. Researchers continue to explore how sleep patterns in colonial communities differ from modern habits. Without artificial light to extend activity, nights often unfold in segments of rest and wakefulness. You notice an older woman stirring from her bed after only a short time, rising to check the embers before returning to her blanket. The cycle of vigilance and repose shapes both body and mind. Body, as the fire settles into glowing coals, conversation fades into murmured reflections. Someone recounts a memory of past winters when snow pressed heavily against the door. Another speaks of hopes for a more stable future once conflict subsides. Their voices drift through the room like soft threads weaving connection across generations. You step outside again and gaze upward. The sky has grown paler near the east, hinting at dawn's approach. Night here never feels entirely secure. It invites both contemplation and quiet apprehension. You walk a short distance from the house and listen to the stillness. Every sound carries farther in darkness. A distant owl, the faint splash of water against stones, your own breathing steady and measured. Turning back towards the sheltering glow of candlelight, you feel gratitude for the simple comforts that sustain these households. Warmth, food, shared presence. In a year defined by upheaval, such moments of rest hold immeasurable value. You know that the next stretch of your journey will ask you to step beyond fatigue and reflect on what this experience has truly revealed. With slow steps, you return to the path and continue beneath the fading stars. The horizon brightens, gradually inviting you toward the final realization waiting just beyond the first light of morning. You walk steadily toward the paling horizon as night loosens its hold on the land. The eastern sky glows with a faint wash of silver and rose. A rooster calls somewhere in the distance, followed by another, until the quiet fields seem to echo with the promise of morning. Your footsteps feel slower now, not from reluctance, but from reflection. You sense that the journey is drawing toward its quiet conclusion, asking you to gather what you have seen and felt along the way. As dawn unfolds, the familiar patterns of rural life begin again. Smoke rises from chimneys, doors creak open, figures step into the cool air with practiced resolve. Yet you notice how differently you perceive these scenes now. What once appeared simple reveals layers of effort, resilience, contradiction. The myth of 1776 as a neat pageant of heroism has given way to a more human understanding shaped by labour, uncertainty and hope. A widely recognised truth about this year settles gently into your thoughts. Independence is declared in 1776, marking a turning point in political history. Yet the experience of that transformation varies profoundly across communities and individuals. For some, it signals opportunity. For others, disruption. For many, it remains a distant promise whose meaning will unfold only gradually. You feel the complexity of that reality in every quiet gesture around you. You pass a field where a farmer pauses to watch the sunrise before lifting his tools for another day. His stillness feels significant, as though he too is measuring the distance between ideals and daily survival. Nearby, a woman hangs fresh laundry in the early light, her movements steady and unhurried. A child carries a wooden pail toward the well, already learning the rhythm that will shape a lifetime. A curious reflection surfaces as you recall an old traveller's note describing the dawn chorus of colonial settlements as a kind of unspoken agreement to begin again regardless of hardship. Whether poetic or practical, the idea resonates deeply now. Renewal here is not dramatic, it is persistent. It happens in the quiet decision to rise to work, to trust that tomorrow may bring something better. Researchers continue to explore how memory reshapes our understanding of revolutionary eras. As you stand at the edge of the road and watch the sun climb above the horizon, you realize that history is often filtered through longing and legend. The rough textures you have touched, the anxious conversations you have overheard, the small acts of kindness you have witnessed, these form a truer portrait than any idealized image. You sit for a moment on a low stone wall and let the warmth of morning settle across your shoulders. Birds sweep overhead in swift arcs. Dew glitters on the grass like scattered fragments of glass. The world feels at once ordinary and extraordinary. You sense that the people of 1776 do not wake each day thinking of themselves as historical figures. They wake because life demands it. Gradually the road fills with movement. Wagons creak into motion. Voices exchange greetings tinged with both optimism and caution. You notice how community persists despite uncertainty, how cooperation emerges even in the shadow of disagreement. The revolution lives not only in documents but also in these countless interactions that shape shared experience. You rise from the wall and begin to walk once more, though there is nowhere specific left to go. The journey has brought you to an understanding rather than a destination. You carry with you the realization that most people in this era navigate a world far messier and more demanding than later stories suggest. They endure discomfort. They negotiate change. They hold fast to moments of connection that make endurance worthwhile. The sun now shines fully across the land, illuminating every furrow and fence. You feel a quiet sense of closure, as though the landscape itself is acknowledging your presence one last time. With a final glance at the waking countryside, you allow your steps to slow. The narrative of the day fades into gentle reflection. You imagine yourself settling beside a small stream, listening to the steady flow of the water over stones. Your breathing deepens. The weight of travel lifts gradually from your shoulders. Images from the past hours drift through your thoughts like soft clouds. Fields at dawn, candlelight in humble rooms, voices raised in both hope and fear. Each memory softens as you let it pass. The sounds of morning grow distant, replaced by the quiet rhythm of your own heartbeat. You feel reassured by the simple knowledge that history, like the stream beside you, continues to move forward even when we pause to rest. You allow your eyes to close. The warmth of sunlight lingers like a gentle promise. You sink further into stillness, surrounded by the calm presence of the landscape. Every tension loosens. Every question settles. The story of 1776 fades into a soothing whisper, leaving only the sense of having shared a journey through time and returned safely to the present. Sweet dreams.